A woman in a simple gray cardigan and worn-out sweatpants stood in a store designed to make people like her feel insignificant, but they had no idea who she was. She was a ghost from a world they couldn't comprehend, a world of unimaginable wealth and influence, cloaked in the humble attire of an everyday person. The store manager, a man whose suit cost more than her entire outfit combined, saw only a nuisance, a misplaced commoner who had wandered into his cathedral of luxury. He never saw it coming. He prided himself on his ability to spot true class, to separate the wheat from the chaff, but his judgment was about to be shattered in the most public and humiliating way possible. What happened next left everyone speechless and served as a powerful lesson that true worth is never, ever just skin deep. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The air inside Elysian Fields, the city's most exclusive luxury boutique, was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished leather. A carefully curated atmosphere designed to intimidate as much as it was to entice. Marble floors gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting, reflecting the glittering glass cases that held jewels worth more than most houses. Each item, from the silk scarves to the handcrafted watches, was an artifact of a world far removed from the everyday. It was into this temple of opulence that Evelyn Sterling walked, her soft-soled sneakers making no sound on the unforgiving stone. She pulled her simple gray cardigan a little tighter around herself, not from cold, but from a lifetime of habit. She was here for a specific purpose, a singular mission, to find the perfect 10-year anniversary gift for her husband, a man who appreciated craftsmanship and history above all else. She had seen it online, a vintage Patek Philippe watch from 1957, a masterpiece of horology, and this store was its sole, proud possessor. She moved quietly through the aisles, her eyes scanning the displays, oblivious to the stares she was attracting. The other patrons, women with perfectly coiffed hair and men in tailored suits, looked at her with a mixture of confusion and disdain. Her presence was a dissonant note in their carefully composed symphony of wealth. A young sales assistant, a girl named Clara with kind eyes and a nervous smile, approached her first. "Can I help you with anything, ma'am?" she asked, her voice soft and respectful. Evelyn gave her a warm, genuine smile. "Yes, thank you. I'm here to see the 1957 Patek Philippe. I believe you have it in your vintage collection." Clara's eyes widened slightly. It was the most expensive piece in the store. Before she could answer, a sharp, condescending voice cut through the air. "I will handle this, Clara." Arthur Finch, the store manager, materialized beside them. He was a man who wore his authority like a second skin, his posture ramrod straight, his signature gold tie held in place by a diamond clip that winked arrogantly in the light. He gave Evelyn a long, slow look, his gaze traveling from her simple shoes up to her unadorned face, and a smug sneer formed on his lips. He saw nothing of value, only an inconvenience. "Clara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, never taking his eyes off Evelyn, "go and polish the silver in the back. Some of us have to maintain the store's standards." He then turned his full, dismissive attention to Evelyn. "Are you lost, madam? The department store is across the street. We cater to a certain class of clientele here." Evelyn remained calm, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She had faced men like Arthur before, men who built their fragile egos on the foundations of superficial judgment. She met his gaze without flinching. "I am not lost," she said, her voice even and firm. "I am here to make a purchase. I would like to see the watch." Arthur let out a short, derisive laugh. It was a sound that echoed the cold, hard surfaces of the store around them. He straightened his tie, a symbolic gesture of reasserting his dominance. "The watch? My dear woman, the price of that watch would likely be more than your yearly income. Perhaps I can show you a catalog?" You could look at the pretty pictures. The insult was designed to sting, to humiliate, to drive her from his pristine showroom. But Evelyn was a fortress, her dignity an impenetrable wall. She had learned long ago that the anger of such men was not her burden to carry. She simply took a deep, steadying breath, preparing herself for the confrontation that was now, she knew, inevitable. She was not just a customer anymore. She was a test, a lesson waiting to be taught. Arthur's smug satisfaction grew with every passing second of Evelyn's quiet defiance. He interpreted her silence not as strength, but as the dawning, pathetic realization of her misjudgment in entering his domain. He decided to press his advantage, to make an example of her for the benefit of his other, more appropriate clientele, who were now watching the unfolding drama with mild, detached amusement. "You see," he began, projecting his voice so that it carried across the showroom floor, "Elysian Fields is not merely a store. It is an experience. It is a reward for a lifetime of success and achievement. It is for people who understand the value of true luxury, and frankly, it is not a place for idle curiosity." He gestured vaguely at her simple attire. "People like you don't belong here. You dilute the brand. Your presence makes our real customers uncomfortable." Several onlookers shifted their gazes, a few offering faint, complicit smiles in his direction. The public humiliation was now in full swing. Evelyn felt a familiar, quiet ache. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound sense of disappointment in the smallness of this man. She thought of her husband, Richard, a man who had built an empire from nothing, a man who still wore the faded t-shirt he'd had in college to work in his garden, a man who believed that a person's worth was measured in their character, not their bank account. She was here to buy him a gift that celebrated 10 years of that shared philosophy, and she was being shamed for living it. "I assure you, I am not curious," Evelyn said, her voice remaining impossibly steady. "I am a serious buyer. I am prepared to purchase the 1957 Patek Philippe today, in full." The directness of her statement seemed to momentarily throw Arthur off balance. He had expected her to scurry away in shame. He recovered quickly, his sneer returning with renewed vigor. "In full? And how would you be proposing to do that? With a jar of coins you've been saving?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, insulting whisper. "Listen to me carefully. I am the manager here. My job is to protect the integrity of this establishment. I am asking you, politely for now, to leave. Do not make me call security." It was the ultimate dismissal, the final assertion of his power. He had judged her, found her wanting, and was now casting her out. He turned his back on her slightly, a gesture of finality, and began to address another customer nearby, as if Evelyn had already vanished. But Evelyn did not vanish. She stood her ground. "I will not leave until I have seen the watch." Her words were not loud, but they were filled with an unyielding resolve that cut through the polite murmurs of the store. Arthur's face contorted with fury. His professional veneer was beginning to crack. This was no longer about maintaining standards. It was about a direct challenge to his authority. "That's it," he hissed, spinning around to face her. "You have been warned." He snapped his fingers, and from a discreet alcove near the entrance, 2 burly security guards in sharp black suits began to move towards them. The other customers now looked on with rapt attention. This was better than afternoon tea. The kind young sales assistant, Clara, watched from behind a display case, her face pale with distress. She knew this was wrong. She had seen the quiet dignity in the woman's eyes and felt the raw arrogance pouring from her manager. The guards reached Evelyn, their large frames flanking her. One of them spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Evelyn looked at Arthur, at his triumphant, sneering face. She looked at the curious, judgmental eyes of the other shoppers, and then she looked past them all, through the large plate glass window at the front of the store, and she smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Because she knew what they didn't. She knew that in approximately 1 minute, the entire world of Arthur Finch was going to come crashing down around him. Her husband was never late. Just as the security guards placed their hands gently but firmly on Evelyn's arms, a shadow fell over the entrance of Elysian Fields. A vehicle of immense proportions, a custom black Hummer that seemed to absorb the very sunlight, had pulled directly onto the curb, ignoring all parking regulations with an impunity that spoke of immense power. The engine was cut, and the sudden silence was more commanding than any noise. The door opened, and a man emerged. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple dark gray Henley jeans. Yet, he carried with him an aura of such profound authority that every head in the store turned instinctively towards him. This was Richard Sterling, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the highest circles of international business, but whose face was rarely seen in public. He scanned the store, his sharp, intelligent eyes quickly finding his wife being flanked by 2 security guards. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by a cold, dangerous calm. He walked into the store, his heavy boots making a stark, rhythmic sound on the marble floor, a sound that seemed to count down the final seconds of Arthur Finch's career. Arthur, who had been enjoying his victory, felt a sudden chill. He didn't recognize the man, but he recognized the power. This was a different breed of wealth, not the preening, look-at-me variety he was accustomed to, but something older, quieter, and infinitely more formidable. Richard stopped directly in front of the scene. He looked at the guard's hands on his wife's arms, and his gaze was like ice. "Take your hands off my wife," he said. His voice was not loud, but it held a tone of absolute command that brooked no argument. The guards, seasoned professionals though they were, immediately complied, stepping back as if they had touched a live wire. Richard then looked at Evelyn, his expression softening with concern. "Eve, are you all right? I got your text." Evelyn gave a small nod, her composure unwavering. "I'm fine, my love. Just a small misunderstanding." Richard's gaze then settled on Arthur, who was now beginning to sweat. The diamond tie clip suddenly felt like a noose. "You're the manager here?" Richard asked, his voice deceptively mild. Arthur, struggling to regain his composure, puffed out his chest. "I am. And this woman was creating a disturbance. She refused to leave." "A disturbance?" Richard repeated, one eyebrow raised. "My wife has never created a disturbance in her life. She came here to buy me an anniversary present. A 1957 Patek Philippe, I believe." The specificity of the statement finally landed a direct hit on Arthur's arrogance. A seed of doubt, of pure, terrifying panic, began to sprout in his gut. He looked from the imposing man to the woman in the simple cardigan and back again. The pieces were not fitting together in a way that he liked. He decided to bluff, to reassert his position. "That may be, but she was unable to demonstrate that she was a serious customer. We have standards to maintain." Richard's face remained impassive, but his eyes grew colder. "Standards? You think my wife doesn't meet your standards?" He paused, letting the weight of the question hang in the silent store. "I don't think you know who my wife is. I don't think you know who I am." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. He didn't hand it to Arthur. He held it up for him to read. The card was stark white, with only a name and a title embossed in black. Richard Sterling, Chairman and CEO, Sterling Holdings International. Arthur's eyes scanned the words, and his mind raced to connect the dots. Sterling Holdings, the multinational conglomerate. The parent company that owned dozens of luxury brands, retail chains, and properties. The company that owned Elysian Fields. The color drained completely from Arthur's face. His mouth went dry. He was not looking at a customer. He was looking at the man who owned the very ground he was standing on. The man whose wife he had just publicly humiliated and tried to have thrown out of the store. The silence in Elysian Fields was absolute, broken only by the faint, panicked rasp of Arthur's breathing. The smugness had evaporated from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. His meticulously constructed world, built on the shallow foundations of brand names and price tags, had been demolished in an instant. The name on the card, Richard Sterling, was not just a name, it was a reckoning. It was the signature on his paychecks, the ultimate authority in the corporate hierarchy he so revered. He looked at Evelyn, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not a misplaced commoner, but the calm, dignified face of his ultimate employer, the matriarch of the Sterling Empire. His legs felt weak, and he unconsciously gripped a nearby glass counter for support, his knuckles turning white. Richard Sterling lowered the business card, his expression unreadable but radiating a chilling disappointment. He was not yelling. He was not causing a scene. His quiet intensity was far more terrifying than any outburst could ever be. "You have standards," Richard said, his voice a low, cutting murmur that was for Arthur alone. "Let me tell you about my standards. My standard is that any person, regardless of what they wear or how they look, who walks into one of our establishments is treated with dignity and respect. My standard is that the people we employ are capable of seeing human beings, not just walking wallets." He took a step closer, and Arthur flinched. "You didn't just insult my wife, You insulted the core principles of this entire company. You insulted my family's legacy." Arthur began to stammer, words failing him as his mind struggled to formulate an excuse, a plea, anything to mitigate the disaster. "Mr. Sterling, I had no idea. I am so terribly sorry. It was a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding." Richard cut him off, his voice like flint. "You judged a person based on their clothing. You publicly humiliated them to feel powerful. You failed at the most basic level of human decency. And you did it while wearing this company's name on your lapel." He turned his head slightly and addressed one of the security guards who was now attempting to blend into the marble walls. "Get me the head of regional operations on the phone. Now." The guard fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. The other patrons, who had been watching with detached amusement, now stared at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the unfolding execution. They were suddenly acutely aware of their own complicity, their silent assent to Arthur's snobbery. Richard turned his attention back to the quivering manager. "Arthur Finch, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct and the management of this store. You will hand over your keys and any store property to your assistant manager. You will then be escorted from the premises." Each word was a nail in the coffin of Arthur's career. The humiliation he had so casually inflicted on Evelyn was now being returned to him 100-fold, not with sneering condescension, but with cold, irrefutable consequence. He had built his identity on this job, on the power it gave him, and it was being stripped away from him in front of the very audience he had sought to impress. Evelyn stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Richard," she said softly. Richard looked at her, and the hardness in his eyes softened for a moment. But Evelyn wasn't looking at Arthur with pity. She was looking at the young sales assistant, Clara, who was still standing by the display case, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. "Clara!" Evelyn called out, her voice clear and kind. "You were the only person who treated me with respect when I walked in here. Effective immediately. You are the acting manager of this store." The shock on Clara's face was even greater than the terror on Arthur's. It was a moment of stunning vindication and reversal, a clear and powerful statement that decency, not arrogance, was what the Sterlings truly valued. The immediate aftermath in the store was a whirlwind of quiet, efficient change. While Arthur Finch stood frozen, his face a ghostly white, the regional operations manager, a panicked voice on the security guard's phone, was already processing Richard Sterling's directives. The transfer of power was swift and decisive. Clara, stunned into near immobility, was gently guided through the necessary protocols by Richard's calm instructions. He asked her to secure Arthur's keys and to lock his office, assuring her that a corporate team would be there within the hour to support her. The other employees, who had previously emulated Arthur's dismissive attitude, now scurried to assist Clara, their faces etched with a newfound, fearful respect. They saw in this sudden, dramatic shift not just the fall of one manager, but the establishment of a new order. Evelyn watched it all, her expression one of thoughtful sadness rather than triumph. She took no joy in Arthur's ruin. She saw only a broken system, an environment where such behavior was not only possible, but encouraged. She approached Arthur, who was now being discreetly but firmly guided toward a back exit by the security team. He wouldn't even be allowed the dignity of leaving through the front door. He refused to look at her, his eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. "Mr. Finch," Evelyn said, her voice devoid of malice. He flinched at the sound of her voice but did not look up. "I hope you take this time to reflect," she continued softly. "Not on who I am, but on what you did. Status is not a shield for poor character. It should be a platform for grace." He said nothing, simply allowing himself to be led away, disappearing from the pristine showroom he had lorded over for so long. With the immediate crisis handled, Richard turned his full attention to his wife. He guided her to a plush velvet couch in a quiet corner of the store. "Are you really all right?" he asked, his voice laced with a deep, protective concern. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm fine. It's just tiring. Why do people build their worth on such fragile things?" Richard wrapped his arm around her. "Because it's easier than building it on something real," he said. "It's why we have to be better." It was in that moment that Evelyn's resolve hardened. This couldn't just be about one man's punishment. That was too easy. It had to be about a fundamental change. "I don't want him just fired, Richard," she said, looking up at him. "That solves nothing. He'll just get another job and be the same person. And there are 100 more Arthurs in our other stores. I want to build something. A new training program. Something mandatory for every single employee, from the stockroom to the boardroom. A program about empathy, inclusivity, and the danger of judgment. We'll call it the Sterling Standard." Richard looked at his wife, his heart swelling with love and admiration. This was the woman he had married. The one who could face down arrogance with grace and turn a moment of personal ugliness into an opportunity for widespread positive change. "The Sterling Standard?" he repeated, a smile finally breaking through his serious demeanor. "I love it. We'll fund it completely. We will make it the new gold standard for customer service in any industry." He then looked over at Clara, who was nervously directing staff, already stepping into her new role with a surprising competence. "And we'll put her in charge of the pilot program for this region. Real change needs real leaders." The other patrons, who had been trying to discreetly leave, were stopped by one of Richard's security team. Richard walked over to them, his presence silencing their nervous chatter. "I want to thank you all for your patronage today," he said, his voice polite but with an unmistakable edge. "You were all witnesses to a failure of our company's values. As compensation for the unpleasantness, your purchases today will be complimentary. However, we do ask for one thing in return. Remember what you saw. Remember that kindness costs nothing and that a person's value can never be judged by their appearance." He then turned and walked back to his wife, leaving a showroom full of stunned, silent, and deeply reflective millionaires in his wake. Arthur Finch sat in the sterile, beige-walled waiting room of the Sterling Holdings International corporate headquarters. It had been 2 weeks since the incident, 2 weeks of sleepless nights and a gnawing, hollow feeling in his gut. He had been placed on indefinite, unpaid leave, and today was the day of his final review, a corporate tribunal that felt more like a sentencing. He wore his finest suit, the one he had always considered his armor, but today it felt like a cheap costume. The fabric was heavy and suffocating, the signature tie a silken noose around his neck. Without the context of his luxurious store, without the power of his title, he felt utterly exposed. He was just a man in an expensive suit, waiting to be judged. He replayed the events of that day over and over in his mind, each time with a fresh wave of sickening clarity. He saw Evelyn Sterling's calm, unwavering gaze. He heard her husband's cold, dissecting words. But most vividly, he saw the sneer on his own face, the smug, arrogant posture he had adopted, and he felt a profound sense of self-loathing. Who was that person? How had he become so twisted, so convinced that the superficial trappings of wealth were a measure of human worth? He thought back to his own childhood. He hadn't come from money. His parents were hard-working people who had sacrificed everything to send him to a good school. He remembered the shame he felt as a teenager, wearing off-brand clothes while his classmates sported designer labels. He remembered the burning desire to be one of them, to be accepted, to be on the inside. He had worked tirelessly, clawing his way up the retail ladder, learning the language and customs of the wealthy. He had become an expert mimic. He learned which brands to praise, which wines to recommend, how to drop the right names at the right time. Somewhere along the way, the mimicry had consumed him. He had forgotten the boy who was ashamed of his worn-out shoes and had become the gatekeeper who mocked others for the same perceived sin. The role he played had become his reality. He had become the very thing he once despised. A voice called his name, and he was led into a large boardroom. 3 stern-faced executives from Human Resources sat at one end of a long, polished table, but he barely noticed them. Sitting quietly at the other end of the table was Evelyn Sterling. She was dressed as simply as she had been in the store, in a plain cream-colored blouse and dark trousers. There was no security, no husband, just her. Her presence was more intimidating than a room full of lawyers. "Mr. Finch," one of the executives began, "we have reviewed the incident reports, the security footage, and the witness statements. The company's position is that your actions constitute gross misconduct and are grounds for immediate termination." Arthur's heart sank, even though he had been expecting it. It was the finality of the word termination that hit him. It was over. His career was over. He would be blacklisted in the industry. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic, last-ditch plea, but Evelyn held up a hand, and everyone in the room fell silent. "Before you make your final decision," she said, her voice soft but commanding, "I would like to speak to Mr. Finch." The executives looked surprised but nodded their assent. Evelyn's gaze met Arthur's across the vast expanse of the table. "Arthur," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I didn't come here today to see you fired. I came here to see if you've learned anything." The question was simple, but it cut through all the corporate jargon and procedure. It was a question about his soul. He looked at this woman, this quiet powerhouse he had so grievously misjudged, and for the first time since he was a boy, he told the unvarnished truth. "I learned," he began, his voice cracking with emotion, "that I became a hollow man. I built my entire life on a lie, and when I looked at you, I wasn't seeing a customer. I was seeing a reflection of the person I used to be, the person I was terrified of becoming again. It was cruel, it was unforgivable, and I am deeply, profoundly ashamed." He said the last words with his head bowed, the weight of his confession pressing down on him. There was a long silence. When he finally looked up, he saw not contempt in Evelyn Sterling's eyes, but a flicker of something else. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something far more valuable, a possibility. Evelyn let the weight of Arthur's confession settle in the quiet boardroom. She saw the raw, painful honesty in his eyes, the complete absence of the arrogant mask he had worn so proudly in the store. He was stripped bare, not just of his job, but of his illusions. She knew in that moment that simply firing him would be a waste. It would punish the man, but it wouldn't repair the mindset that had created him. Her goal, the Sterling standard, was about building something better, and sometimes that meant salvaging the broken pieces. She turned to the surprised HR executives. "I do not want Mr. Finch terminated," she stated calmly. A murmur of confusion went through the executives. "Mrs. Sterling," the lead executive said, "his actions were a clear violation. His actions were a symptom of a corporate culture that we have allowed to fester." Evelyn interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "A culture that prioritizes sales figures over human connection, that silently encourages the very judgment he displayed. We are all, to some degree, responsible. Therefore, the solution must be restorative, not just punitive." She then turned her full attention back to a stunned Arthur. "Here is my proposal. We are launching a new company-wide training initiative called the Sterling Standard. It will be an intensive 3-month program focused on empathy, unconscious bias, and the principles of dignified customer service. It will be mandatory for every employee, from the bottom to the very top." She paused, letting the scope of her words sink in. "Arthur, I am offering you the chance to be the first participant in this program. You will not be a manager. You will not be in a position of authority. You will start at the very bottom. You will be paid a basic trainee's wage. You will learn everything from the ground up, not just about our products, but about our values. Your final evaluation will not be based on a sales quota, but on a peer review from the employees you once managed. It will be the hardest work you have ever done." The executives were speechless. This was unprecedented. It flew in the face of all standard corporate procedure. But Evelyn Sterling was not a standard corporate figure. Arthur looked at her, his mind reeling. She was offering him a lifeline, but it was a lifeline that required him to completely let go of his former self. He would have to swallow his pride, face the people he had lorded over, and prove, through action, that his apology was not just empty words. It was a path to redemption, but it was paved with humility and hard work. It was a chance not just to save his career, but to save himself. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this for me?" Evelyn's expression was earnest, her moral conviction clear. "Because I believe that people can change, Arthur. I believe that everyone deserves a chance to become a better version of themselves. My husband and I didn't build this company just to sell expensive things. We built it to create opportunities. This is your opportunity. The question is, what will you do with it?" The choice was his. He could refuse, take his severance, and disappear into obscurity, forever branded by his failure. Or he could accept this strange, difficult, and utterly unexpected offer of grace. He thought of the hollow man he had become. He thought of the kind, hard-working parents who had believed in him. He knew what he had to do. With tears welling in his eyes, he looked across the table at the woman he had tried to kick out of his store and gave her his answer. "I accept," he said, his voice thick with a humility he had never known. "I will do whatever it takes. Thank you." He was no longer Arthur Finch, the arrogant manager. He was just Arthur, the first student of the Sterling Standard. The implementation of the Sterling Standard became Evelyn's personal mission. It was not enough to create a PowerPoint presentation and a series of generic training videos. She envisioned something far more immersive and transformative. She and Richard poured millions from their personal foundation into developing a curriculum that was unlike anything the corporate world had ever seen. They hired consultants not from the world of business, but from the fields of social psychology, ethics, and even theater. The program's first module wasn't about sales techniques, it was about storytelling. Employees were encouraged to share their own life experiences, to talk about times they had felt judged or invisible. The goal was to break down the artificial barriers of hierarchy and create a shared sense of vulnerability and humanity. The second module involved practical, real-world exercises. Executives who had spent decades in corner offices were required to work for a week in the stockroom, unpacking boxes and tagging merchandise. Junior sales assistants were given leadership training and tasked with presenting new ideas to senior management. The program was designed to dismantle the echo chambers of privilege and give every employee a holistic understanding of the entire company ecosystem. Arthur Finch was, as promised, the program's first and most scrutinized participant. He was assigned to the flagship Elysian Fields store, the very scene of his downfall. His first task was not to sell, but to clean. He spent his days polishing the same glass counters he once leaned on with such arrogance. He cleaned the floors he had felt were too good for Evelyn Sterling to walk on. It was a profoundly humbling experience. The other employees, led by the newly confident and capable Clara, watched him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Some still harbored resentment, and they made their feelings known through cold shoulders and clipped, professional interactions. But Clara, guided by Evelyn's principles, insisted that he be given a fair chance. She treated him with the same professional respect she showed every other employee, a kindness that was, in its own way, more cutting than any insult. Arthur's first breakthrough came during a storytelling session. With his voice shaking, he told the assembled staff about his childhood, about his feelings of inadequacy, and about his desperate, misguided quest for validation through status. He didn't make excuses for his behavior, but he offered an explanation. For the first time, his former colleagues saw not the tyrant manager, but a flawed and broken human being. A few of them, the ones who had also come from humble beginnings, felt a reluctant pang of recognition. The change in him was slow, incremental, and marked by setbacks. There were days when his old arrogance flared up, when he chafed at taking orders from people he once commanded. But each time, he would remember Evelyn's words, the unexpected offer of grace, and he would force himself to be better, to be humbler. He learned the names of the cleaning staff. He learned about the stockroom supervisor's children. He began to see the people around him not as cogs in a machine, but as individuals with their own stories, their own struggles, and their own dignity. He discovered a satisfaction in a job well done, whether it was perfectly organizing a shelf of handbags or simply helping a lost tourist with directions that far surpassed the shallow thrill of condescending to a customer. Meanwhile, the Sterling Standard was having a ripple effect throughout the entire corporation. The initial resistance from some old guard executives melted away as the results began to speak for themselves. Stores that embraced the program saw not only a dramatic increase in customer satisfaction scores, but also a significant boost in employee morale and a decrease in turnover. The company's stock price began to climb, driven by a new public perception of the Sterling brand as one that stood for something more than just luxury. It stood for respect. Evelyn and Richard became champions of a new kind of corporate social responsibility, one that began with how a company treated its own people. They proved that empathy was not just good ethics, it was good business. A full year passed. The seasons changed, and with them, the very soul of Sterling Holdings International. The Sterling Standard was no longer a pilot program, but a fully integrated part of the company's DNA. It had become a case study at business schools, a benchmark for a new, more humane form of capitalism. The Elysian Fields flagship store, once a cold monument to exclusivity, now felt different. It was still luxurious, still filled with beautiful and expensive things, but the atmosphere had changed. The air of intimidation was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of warmth and welcome. The staff no longer hovered like vultures, sizing up potential customers, but engaged with them genuinely, offering assistance with a smile that reached their eyes. The new manager, Clara, had blossomed in her role. She led with a quiet confidence and an innate empathy that inspired fierce loyalty in her team. She had become one of the most respected young leaders in the company, a testament to Evelyn's belief that true talent often resides where it is least expected. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Evelyn Sterling once again walked into the store. She was dressed, as always, in her simple, comfortable clothes. This time, however, no one gave her a second glance. The employees greeted her with warm, familiar smiles. They knew who she was, not just as the owner, but as the architect of their new, better reality. She was looking for a birthday gift for Clara, a small token of her appreciation. A man approached her, his posture respectful, his gaze direct and clear. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Sterling. Is there anything I can help you find today?" It was Arthur. He was wearing the simple black uniform of a senior sales associate. The expensive suit was gone, and with it, the last traces of the arrogant man he had once been. He looked older, his face lined with the hard-won lessons of the past year, but his eyes were calm and content. He looked for the first time at peace with himself. "Arthur," Evelyn said, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "It's good to see you. How are you?" "I am well, thank you," he replied, his voice even and sincere. "I am truly well." There was no awkwardness between them, no lingering resentment. His transformation had been so complete that it had erased the ugliness of their first encounter. He had not only completed the Sterling Standard program, he had become its most passionate advocate, often mentoring new trainees and sharing his own story as a cautionary tale and a message of hope. He helped Evelyn select a beautiful, handcrafted leather-bound journal for Clara. As he wrapped it with meticulous care, he spoke quietly. "I want to thank you again, Mrs. Sterling. Not for the job, but for the chance. You didn't just save my career, you gave me back my integrity." Evelyn was deeply moved. This was the true return on her investment. Not the rising stock price or the glowing press releases, but this, the quiet, profound redemption of one man. "You did the work, Arthur," she said softly. "You earned your own integrity back. Just promise me one thing." "Anything," he said. "Promise me you'll keep telling your story." It's a powerful one. He looked up from the gift he was wrapping and met her gaze in the reflection of a nearby mirror. "I promise," he said. "It's the most valuable thing I have to offer." Later that day, after Evelyn had left, a young couple wandered into the store. They were dressed in simple, casual clothes, looking around with a sense of awe and intimidation, much as Evelyn had a year ago. Several sales associates were busy with other customers. Arthur saw them. Without a moment's hesitation, he walked over, a warm, welcoming smile on his face. "Welcome to Elysian Fields," he said, his voice kind and genuine. "My name is Arthur. Please, take your time and look around. If you need anything at all, just let me know. We're happy you're here." The couple visibly relaxed, their nervousness melting away under the warmth of his sincere welcome. Arthur had closed the loop. The student had become the master, not of luxury or status, but of kindness. The story of what happened at Elysian Fields became something of a legend within the Sterling Corporation and beyond. It was a story told in boardrooms and break rooms, a modern parable about humility and second chances. Evelyn and Richard Sterling continued to lead their company with the same quiet conviction, proving that a global empire could be run with both a sharp mind and a compassionate heart. They expanded their philanthropic efforts, funding educational programs and initiatives aimed at breaking down the very social and economic barriers that create men like the old Arthur Finch. Their legacy would not just be in the buildings they built or the wealth they accumulated, but in the culture they changed and the lives they touched. The Sterling Standard became the new normal, a quiet revolution of respect that rippled outwards, influencing other companies to reevaluate their own values. Clara continued her meteoric rise through the company, eventually becoming the head of North American operations. She never forgot where she came from, and she championed a new generation of leaders who were chosen for their character as much as for their skills. She remained a close friend and confidant of Evelyn, the two women united by their shared belief in the power of seeing the best in people. And Arthur? He never sought a management position again. He found his true calling on the showroom floor, not as a gatekeeper, but as a host. He became the store's top-performing sales associate, not because he was a slick salesman, but because he was a master of human connection. He had an almost preternatural ability to make every single person who walked through the doors feel valued and seen. He treated the billionaire in the bespoke suit and the student saving up for their first luxury purchase with the exact same measure of warmth and respect. He had, in the end, learned the true meaning of value. It had nothing to do with price tags and everything to do with dignity. His story served as a permanent reminder to everyone at Sterling Holdings: never, ever judge a book by its cover. For you never know when you might be entertaining angels, or in their case, the unassuming woman who happens to own the entire library. Have you ever felt judged based on your appearance? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated poorly because of how they looked or what they wore? These moments happen every single day, in stores, in workplaces, and in our communities. But the story of Evelyn and Arthur shows us that we have a choice. We can choose to be an Arthur, building our own fragile sense of self-worth by looking down on others. Or we can choose to be an Evelyn, meeting arrogance with grace and using our influence to build a better, kinder world. We can choose to be a Clara, to speak up when something is wrong, even when it's scary. Each one of us has the power to author a story of redemption, to offer a second chance, to uphold the sterling standard in our own lives. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And the next time you see someone, don't just look at their clothes. Look into their eyes. You might be surprised at the value you find.